Hello and welcome to the Complete Analyst. This video is designed to give you a good working definition for business model. It's part of our What Is series defining common terms that many analysts need to work with every day. Perhaps one of these is you. Now, I'm not claiming that this is the only correct definition you can use, but perhaps this one will make your life as an analyst just a little bit easier. So, what is a business model and why should you care? Well, just about any time you're involved in some kind of enterprise level change that is described as a business transformation or even a digital transformation, you're quite likely to encounter the so-called business model. Often you might hear this term tossed around alongside operating model, which is another common and sometimes confusing term with many overlapping concepts. As with operating models, there are likely many different understandings of what this actually means. On the surface, it sounds pretty simple, but in practice, it can get pretty confusing, and this results in unproductive conversations and missed expectations. So let's see if I can provide a good working definition of business model that might help you. Fortunately, in this case, I think there's a shortcut. So let's try this definition. A business model is how an enterprise delivers value and makes money. That sounds pretty simple, but there's actually quite a lot going on here. Now, I know there are lots of different definitions and variations of business model out there, but for our purposes as analysts, I'll propose that we just reuse the business model canvas approach as described in the now classic book, Business Model Generation. And this book is a classic for a very good reason, and the approach it provides has been very widely adopted by many enterprises and consulting firms. At the heart of the approach is the business model canvas that describes a business model using a standard set of 9 nouns to include customers, relationships, channels, revenue, value propositions, activities, resources, partners, and costs. This definition of business model can also be understood quite well in relationship to the operating model, which is covered in other videos that I've linked to in the video notes below, is usually the main thing that you're trying to change in a large transformation initiative. Now, your objective may include refining or rethinking the business model, especially if your scope includes figuring out how to exploit digital technologies. Or your objectives might be simply to understand it in order to have the proper context for your work. Either way, this definition provides a very solid foundation for working with business models. So, just a quick aside. While I do believe the business model canvas is an excellent general purpose framework, there are other alternatives you might consider. One of these is the lean canvas, which was derived from the business model canvas and is similar in many respects. In general, the lean canvas tends to be directed a bit more towards startup ventures and new ideas, but it may well apply in other more traditional situations. Conversely, the business model canvas also has a good track record in the startup space. I'm not going to take a position on which you should use, and that's up to you. So if you're not sure, why not try both of these, and perhaps some others, and see which works best for you? So here's a simple made-up example of a business model for a bank. Now, the book, Business Model Generation, has much more to say on this topic, and there are tons of resources and examples on the web that you can leverage. But for now, I'll just take you through this one. First, think of the canvas as 2 halves joined by the value propositions in the center, like a hinge. This might be oversimplifying a bit, but the right side is primarily concerned with demand, and the left side is concerned more with supply. On the right, you have customer segments that connect through channels and relationships in order to generate revenue streams. On the left, the enterprise's key activities and resources, supplemented by partners, drive the enterprise's cost structure and supply what is necessary to meet the demand. So take a moment to pause this video and have a closer look at this example. But really the best way to understand this is to work out some examples on your own. Try doing this on something you know really well, like your own firm, just to get used to how this works. And of course, spend some time with the book. If working business models is a primary concern for you right now, I think you'll be glad that you did. So let's discuss how the business model and operating model overlap. Have you explored our definition of an operating model that uses the Archimate 3.1 standard? If not, I've got some links below that will give you that overview. Also, some clever folks have mapped the nouns from this standard onto the business model canvas. So in this way, we can see how these concepts overlap. Now, to understand what I'm going to show you next, you'll need this graphical representation of the Archimate meta model from the Open Group. There will be more about this in other videos linked below, but I want you to notice here is how the nouns I just showed you are represented in the Archimate notation with its standard shapes, icons, and colors. You may want to pause for a moment or go back to the previous frame to see how these line up. So bringing this all together, you can see this example where operating model architecture elements from Archimate 3.1 have been mapped onto the business model canvas. You'll find other instances of this if you search for them, but I like this one. Again, take a pause to see if you can see what's going on here. And don't worry if you don't understand all the terms at this point. But what does this do for you? For one, it's showing you how a business model and operating model are overlapping and use similar concepts. So if you happen to start your work by defining the business model, you should ultimately be reusing elements in the operating model, and this also works in the other direction. So what this tells us is that the business model and operating model are connected and should be developed and refined together. In our other videos, we get into various aspects of modeling combined with leveraging the best of standards and other widely accepted practices where we can. But just understanding that these two concepts overlap and can be co-developed is good enough for now. So to sum up, our definition of a business model is pretty simple. A business model is how an enterprise delivers value and makes money. And for our purposes as analysts, the approach defined in business model generation is an excellent framework and very hard for us to improve upon, so let's just use it. There's also a fair amount of overlap between business models and operating models, so developing them together and reusing components can make the whole work product more coherent and consistent. I hope you found this video useful for you, and look in the links below for more related videos that explore this and other adjacent topics. Thanks for watching.